Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Katherine Armstrong. Katherine is a coaching consultant who specializes in aligning culture, strategy, and process. She is the founder of CUSP and a performance coach with Stand and Deliver. Katherine has held roles internationally that focus on accelerating change, leadership development, and strategic planning, all at the corporate level. And I am very excited to share her thoughts, her experiences, and her perspectives with everybody today. Our conversation is going to go in many different directions, including talking about some of the well-intentioned mistakes that leaders commonly make when they're facilitating change. The human impact of change, not just the human impact of the people we're looking to change, but also the human impact on ourselves as we go through the process. The importance of articulating our purpose clearly, accurately, and timely, and also how to encourage people to accept a new identity, which anytime we're going through a change process, that is a huge component of it. Very excited for this conversation. Really looking forward to sharing it with everyone. Thank you all for being here. Before we jump in, we do want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. As always, we have HumanTell. If you haven't already, please head over to humantell.com and enter the code Inquasive25 for 25% off of their best-in-class self-paced online learning to begin to recognize when facial expressions of emotion and nonverbal behavior are changing at lightning speed, indicating an emotional shift that somebody's experiencing, and then developing the skill to realize what that emotional shift likely means for you and your counterpart at that moment in time. I highly recommend it. I've done all the training myself. Please head over to humantell.com again and enter the code Inclusive25. For the professional interviewers, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can learn everything you need to know about the International Association of Interviewers, what it takes to qualify as a member, what you'll have access to as a member, online training, in-person training, international training, events around the country, as well as interviewing resources, leadership updates, networking opportunities, exclusive content, and so much more. While you're there, you can also learn more about the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. What does it take to qualify? How do you earn the designation? How do you maintain the designation? And what can it mean for you in your career? All that and more over at certifiedinterviewer.com. And while you're online, please check out Inquasive.com. Inquasive.com is where you can learn more about the customized programs our clients ask us to facilitate their senior leaders, their sales team, their HR team, and beyond to teach them how to obtain the everyday confessions with strategic and ethical observation and persuasion techniques. Everything you need to know is there at Inquasive.com. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us again this week. Very happy you're here with us. So now, without further ado, I introduce to you Katherine Armstrong. Hello, Katherine. It is so great to see you again. Thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Great.
It's been several years since we initially met when I saw you give a presentation, and I was immediately drawn to not only the content, but the expertise and the delivery behind it. And I'm very excited to be able to share some of those lessons, and I'm sure much more with everybody today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I remember that presentation. That was a fun day. Yeah.
It was. And I think I was invited as a guest, actually, if I remember correctly. So it's one of those, like, I wasn't supposed to even be there kind of things, but we were able to connect, and it worked out quite well.
I think that all goes back to like LinkedIn connections and what we can offer each other when we connect through that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're not just, I mean, I don't mean we, me and you, but well, we're not just spamming each other or, posting all kinds of crazy stuff. And actually use it for what it was invented for. You'd be surprised what we can achieve with it.
Right. Right. Like taking the virtual, like the digital network and making it into real live person-to-person connection.
Yes. And thankfully I've had probably a dozen or so at least come from that. So I know a little bit about what you do. I'm not going to overstep. We've had conversations previously, but I know a lot of it goes beyond this, but working with organizations to facilitate change. And I know there's layers to that, and it goes well beyond. But I feel like from hearing you speak previously and knowing a little bit about your content and what you do, that there are a number of leaders who mean well, when they're trying to facilitate change in the organization, and they say and do things with the best of intentions, and then are astounded and frustrated and upset when it creates more resistance that they weren't anticipating. So I was hoping maybe we could start the conversation by talking through some of the well-intentioned actions that leaders take, which actually hurts the change process instead of helping the change process.
Yeah. That's a really ripe area. I think if I were ever going to write a book, this is what I'd write a whole book about.
I'll
But
read
let me
it.
just focus on three ideas that leaders, and again, as you said, they have great intention, but when they're trying to follow some kind of playbook, when they're just busy, they forget these things, or they're just not aware of how they land. The first, I'll say, it starts with the leader recognizing himself or herself as a human being. They themselves are going through change. And sometimes they ignore that and put it aside, thinking my job here is to be here for other people. And they neglect to take care of themselves. They neglect to recognize what they themselves are losing in the change. Maybe they're losing the comfort of how things were. Maybe they're losing their title. Maybe they're losing their association with a company that's being an old company when it's being acquired by a new company. And if they are going through their own change without support, without recognizing their own change, that sense of lack of certainty can come out for them. And the other aspect there is that leaders often go through that change themselves. They are aware of the decisions well before other people. And they go through that change. They get through the frustration. They get through the depression of it. They see the opportunity. They start moving forward with energy. And they've been through that before they start communicating it. And they forget where other people are. So remembering, if they've gone through this process of accepting change, remembering that people today are where they were 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago. That's the first. Second is that classic models of change tell leaders to create a burning platform, create a sense of urgency. And to me, this is almost laughable because a burning platform, by definition, creates fear. And people are paralyzed in fear. They can't move. So the idea that we would start by making people scared, it just doesn't work with human psychology. The alternative is to create a burning ambition, meaning that the leaders put forward some vision of the future that is so compelling that people are willing to take a step and be discomforted towards that. That's the second. Third, well-intentioned mistake people make is by noticing that they have to address what's in it for me, meaning that they have to reflect what's in this change for the people that they're talking to. That's a great idea. The problem with that is that leaders guess at that. So it would be much more effective for leaders to have small group or one-on-one dialogues and really be curious about what's going on for the people who are going through change, asking those questions, really understanding what truly is in it for them. And then when they communicate, instead of starting with what's in it for the company or what's in it for the division or what's in it for the team, and then finally at the end getting into, oh, and by the way, what's in it for you, you start by creating relevance to the audience. This is what's in it for you. And then comes the other layers.
That's all fantastic. Obviously, I'm very biased here, but I couldn't agree more with everything that you said. Um, starting with the audience, resonating with the audience first and working backwards from there is so critical because, as you know better than me, when people are afraid, They're listening to address the fear. They're not listening to accept new outcomes or alternatives or actions or to change their mind. They're listening to address that fear first. As long as that fear is there, it's a huge roadblock. I love the burning platform to burning ambition. Love that.
I should probably cite that somewhere. I didn't make it up, but I don't remember where I heard it.
Take credit for it. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine earlier who gave me an illustration, and I said to him, and this is probably how it's going to work out. I will give you credit for that for as long as I can remember, but eventually I'm going to convince myself that was my idea. Like over time, it's just going to happen. So I apologize up front.
Yeah.
But I love that, from the burning platform to the burning ambition. Instead of taking that fear-focused approach, it's what's the future we're working to. For the people who may be listening and aren't watching the conversation, I couldn't help but smile as you were talking about going through change and you were illustrating the curve as you were doing it with your hand. And the first time I heard you speak, I had one of those like aha moments when you made a comparison between a curve that people might often associate with a completely different set of circumstances and what people experience when they go through change. I would be grateful if you don't mind diving into that a little bit and really revisiting that point of, by the time the leaders get to the end of it and somebody else is at the beginning, that gap between could be enormous.
Sure, absolutely. So this idea, the change curve, and many of your audience will have heard of the change curve. Many thinkers, professors talk about this. George Kohlreiser from IMD Business School in Switzerland is the one where I really gained a deeper understanding of it. And he's a psychologist. Where he became aware of the curve was through the seminal work of Rosabeth Moss Kanter on grief. And as George said, all change involves a loss. And if we as humans don't grieve that loss, we can't make a new attachment, a new bond to a new reality or to a new people, to a new strategy, to a new process. I mean, even. And when we say all change involves a loss, I would say that even great change in our lives involves a loss. You get married, there's so much that opens up for you. But there's also the loss of your single life. There's the loss of being alone in your house all the time. There's the loss of what you might have thought your world could have been otherwise. And that can all be true even as you are so excited for your new life with your new spouse. And sometimes those losses that occur in an organizational setting are really small losses. They take the macaroni and cheese off the menu on Friday. That's a loss that we're likely to get over in just a little while if we're resilient, right? The bigger the loss, the more conscious we need to be about the grief process. The other thing I would say, and this might really resonate with you or some of your leaders, is that in times of really big change, in times of really big loss, people can focus on the smallest things as another layer of loss, that next straw that broke the camel's back. So this is why things like changing parking assignment during a time of change, that's a really bad thing now. People don't go to the offices, but, changing the email interface at a time of a big merger and acquisition can be the straw that breaks the camel's back, because people are putting all their resiliency, all their thought into the big change, that even the smallest change that leaders might think is no big deal can really impact people, can really take the big change backwards.
That's a great illustration. And even the way you said it caused me to stop and think that when and I might not say this the right way, when we're investing all of our emotional resources into dealing with one set of circumstances, another seemingly microscopic adjustment to that could send us over the cliff. And it's not because as human beings, we wouldn't generally be able to deal with that. Just don't have any resources left,
right?
Because all of those resources have been dedicated in another area.
Right. Exactly. Did you want me to back up and just explain the change curve, or do you think your audience, is aware of that or can?
No, please go ahead. I think that'd be great.
Okay. So the idea is that, and if we think about it on a graph, and I'll try to say the graph, that's right. The y-axis is engagement and energy. Just think about it as energy in general. And when we first learn about a change, our energy can go up. And it can go up because we're actually in denial. And so we have this energy at just saying why this isn't going to happen. It's why sometimes, if you think about it in terms of some of the greatest loss that we face in life, the death of a loved one, sometimes people react with what other people think is strange. They just think, okay, great. Well, when are we going to get the funeral going? And they just start kind of going into action in almost an over-energized way, because they're in that denial, and it's the human way of just almost rejecting the pain, that instant pain. But as we come out of denial, our energy goes down, and we go through a series of emotions. This is a natural human tendency. We go through a series of emotions. So first we might be questioning, then we might be sad, then we might be frustrated, we might be angry, we might get some of that energy out in anger. And then we get to what we might call the bottom of the change curve, which is some form of depression or depressive behavior. Just no energy, lifeless, just couldn't care about anything, inertia. And we see that in organizations. At first, people will fight the change. They'll have lots of questions. They'll push back. And then they get to the point where no one's talking about it. They're not seeing it. They're showing up at work, but they're not really doing anything. At a certain point, usually because there's something that pulls somebody out, pulls somebody to see something bigger than themselves. So you'll find that with people going through the loss of a loved one, that another friend will need some help. They'll get a pet, and the pet needs their attention. There's something that draws them out of focus on themselves and focus to something bigger, some possibility. And then they start imagining that possibility. They start seeing what is in themselves for possibility. And little by little, as they are drawn by the magnetism of that vision or that other idea, they start finding their resiliency. They start finding their energy again. And ultimately, through the grief cycle, we are prepared to bond, attach to a new identity. And that's a big statement, and some people question that. But from a psychological perspective, we have grown and learned so much. We've said goodbye to something that we're ready to be something different for the next phase of our lives.
I think that's a great way to wrap that up. And even when I think about conversational change or behavioral change, a lot of times really what we're talking about is finding creative ways to aligning what we need somebody to do with their self-image. If they can align it with how they see themselves, or if they can shift how they see themselves to align with the action, then they're in. But if we can't create that self-image alignment, the greater that gap, the harder it's going to be.
Yeah.
So for you to say the new identity piece, I don't feel any need to question that at all. I mean, it's kind of a big statement, but it really it makes a lot of sense. And I know see if I can back myself into this as I hesitate over several simultaneous comments. I apologize. I feel like, and you might see this as well, often when I work with executives and they're frustrated when one of their ideas isn't working or something they said had an unexpected adverse impact or something like that, it's they're trying to they're trying to solve what they see as a rational problem with rational techniques.
Yes.
That's actually an emotional situation for the people that they're trying to resolve it with. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to solve an emotional problem with a rational tool. It's not working. It clearly has to be their fault. It couldn't be my fault.
Exactly.
But then to take that back to the change curve is really the grief curve.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I mean, I brought along for your viewers who are looking. This is I mentioned George Kohlreiser before. This book by George and Susan Goldsworthy, who's also a professor at IMD, and their associate Duncan Combe. There's a great explanation of the bonding cycle, which is where grief fits in and into the new identity and being able to bond. There's a great chapter about that in here, and more about the grief curve and change curve as well. So I just wanted to, this is where you can find it.
Yeah, that book, Care to Dare, is, well, I was going to say probably, but it's not. It's without a doubt the single best leadership book I've ever read, period, hands down. And we were very fortunate that George agreed to join the show on a previous episode. So please finish listening to this conversation, but after, go back and listen to George's conversation, because that was fantastic. Even just thinking that if we're asking somebody to change how they do their job, that emotionally, that can be quite similar to them losing something that they love and care about. Often as leaders, we don't necessarily stop to think about that. And something that struck me earlier when you were talking, and I thought about it in a personal context first, but to fast forward or to take it to business as well, that somebody can be accepting or even looking forward to something new while grieving something that they're leaving behind. So it's not that they're rejecting you or your idea or your future or what you want them to do. They can legitimately be on board for that while still having to put to bed part of their life or their job or their experience or self-image. And those two things can live side by side, and it can still be positive. I think I'd never thought of it that way before I heard you say it. And that, I feel like, well, it's a breakthrough moment for me. And so because the rest of the world should think like I do, obviously, that could be a breakthrough for a lot of leaders if they haven't thought about it that way.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that's another element that even though there's a change curve and researchers have mapped out the process, it doesn't mean that every human goes through it at the same pace and that it's a one-way direction. It is a slipping back and forth through the change curve. That's just the human dimension. And I love what you've said also about that we're not only rational beings. And if there's a choice between what our head is telling us and what our heart is telling us, we'll go in the direction of our heart. So leaders who fail to speak to the heart, who fail to speak to the human, will often just come off as distant. They'll come off as not getting it, and they'll come off as cold and sometimes domineering.
For sure. To try to help bring them and anybody else full circle back, one of the questions I thought when I was listening to you illustrate the curve is you talked about something happens where people get pulled out. So that could be a self-realization. Sometimes I feel like it's a random event that just kicks us out of it, whether we realized it or not. In your experience, have you seen particular techniques or approaches work well for leaders to help pull their team or their people through that last phase to get them out of it? Not everybody is different. Every situation is different. But in general, have you found techniques that are more successful than others to help pull people through that last phase to help them accept the new identity?
Yeah. I wish I could say it's when they find that perfect speech that creates that burning ambition that everybody is inspired by and they go for. And maybe that works some of the time. And I think that leaders still need to try that. But what's coming to my mind now is that it is really more of a sense of safety created by some kind of one-on-one or small group relationship. So it's not when the CEO starts talking about the burning ambition. It's when the supervisor on the shop floor is convincing about the possibility. It's when one colleague can say to another colleague, I got it, and we're going to be okay if we just shift and if we do this. I think it's going to come down to that, some way of creating that human to human bond that is believable and creates safety.
That makes sense. The safety part for certain makes sense. And I feel like within all organizations, and I'm sure with the change and alignment work that you've done, there are key influencers sometimes hidden in the organization. Sometimes we know who they are, sometimes we don't. And it's not necessarily getting the CEO and the CFO on board, or it's not necessarily getting the manager on board. It's who are the people that really influence everyone else on the team for better or worse. And then how do we start getting that person on board to get everybody else on board?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's especially true when there could be something conceptual like purpose. I do quite a bit of work in organizational purpose. And absolutely, there needs to be this top down visioning and expression of this is our purpose, this is our opportunity. But where it really takes hold is when someone just like you, someone who sees the world a little bit like you, lives in your world, can say, this is why it's meaningful to me. This is why it could be meaningful to us. And that's when the purpose, cultural destination, a change can really go from corporate BS to action on the ground.
That makes complete sense. And it ties back into that concept of social proof.
Mm.
And one of the lines when I read Cialdini that stuck out to me for all these years was, I'm probably paraphrasing this and getting it wrong. So on the off chance this ever gets back to him somehow, I'm not intentionally trying to screw it up, I promise. Like if we were in a building and the fire alarm was pulled and we had to evacuate and we weren't familiar with the building, sure, we would follow the crowd, but we wouldn't follow the crowd. We would look for somebody who reminds us of ourselves, and we would follow that person within the crowd.
I love that. I've never heard that before. And that is so true.
It's better news for some of us than others, maybe. but
Yeah.
but and so if somebody like me says this is okay, if somebody like me who I have shared experiences with and maybe shared sacrifices with says it's okay, then I'm going to be okay. But if somebody who is not like me says, trust me, it'll be okay. No, that might be my first indication not to trust you because this might not be okay.
Yeah. No, I get that. That makes a lot of sense.
You mentioned organizational purpose.
Mhm.
And I believe, I was going to say I know, but I'm not that confident. I believe that you also do a lot of work aligning culture, strategy, and purpose with organizations. And I have a suspicion that it's really backwards from purpose back to strategy
Yeah.
and culture going in
Yeah.
that order.
Yeah.
So when you are working with organizations to clearly define their purpose, knowing that that's going to feed into strategy and culture, like that's not a standalone exercise, where do you really focus? Two-part question, if I may, on helping organizations truly define it, but then maybe more importantly, communicating it so others understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you caught that. It really does start with purpose. The reason that you might have said culture, strategy, and purpose is that my company name, CUT, is kind of an acronym for culture, CU, strategy, and purpose. And that actually formed a word, whereas if I started with purpose, I couldn't come up with a word. So that's why culture, status, strategy, and purpose comes off of my tongue now. It does start with purpose. It starts with the why. And that's Simon Sinek, Golden Circle. If your viewers and listeners haven't seen Simon Sinek's TED Talk on that, it's seminal. It really, really is a great explanation of why you start with the why. In terms of how an organization can articulate its purpose, what I've seen in action that works is that instead of going to an outside marketing agency, a branding agency is what a lot of people go to, which is a great thing to create a brand that is externally facing and it's going to be distinctive in the market. When it comes to purpose, the answer isn't out there. The answer is in here. The answer is in our organization. So the first step is what I would call uncovering. So it is actually going out there and asking the questions of people all over the organization about who are we? What's our greatest possible impact? Why are we different? Why do you work here? Why would somebody else want to work here? What is it that you see that we do in the world that nobody else does? what's special about us? And those answers are within the organization. It's the job to uncover them. There's a consultancy called Bright House. It's an arm of BCG, and they actually call this excavating, which I love even more than uncovering, excavating, because it's just such a neat term. And at the same, so there's a sense that the purpose will emerge as you uncover it. At the same time, leaders have a unique perspective, and leaders have the opportunity to be seeing the broader world, seeing not just this business cycle, but the next business cycle, and maybe even a generation ahead of time. So being aware of the generation that came before. So leaders have a role in sculpting, in setting that sense of the purpose being aspirational. And it's the process of bringing those two together to find the expression that is really meaningful. Initiative that I just worked on, I loved what happened when it launched. And the feedback on the purpose was, yeah, this sounds like us. And I couldn't be happier. That was so much better than the organization saying, "Oh, it's very creative. It's lovely, flowery language." Or even that's inspirational. I loved that they said, "Yeah, this is us," because that means it's coming from their soul, and it's going to resonate more. Your second question was about communicating it. Is that?
Yeah, which I think you're already working towards answering. So, how do we look to create it the right way? But then how do we communicate it in a way so other people think that sounds like us, and they buy into it when they hear it?
Yeah. I think the most important piece there is that this is where the communication doesn't start when the purpose is launched. If you've undertaken a process of listening to the organization in that uncovering phase, right after you've done that, you go back to the organization and you say, "This is what we heard from you. This is what's inspiring to, the small team that's actually picking the words. This is what your senior leaders heard and learned from you." So you're already building a sense of ownership. You're building the sense of trust that we asked and we listened, and we're letting you know what we heard. When it comes to the day or days that this comes out, it really is, it's traditional, and I think it works to have the CEO or the senior leadership team hold and own that and be the first ones to articulate it. You can have a launch event that is all the bells and whistles, broadcast all over the world, big cocktail parties. You can do all of that. Or it can be much smaller and much more intimate. It's what fits with the environment of the time. This announcement should stand out from just the day-to-day, but it shouldn't seem like something that is foreign or too extravagant or puts too much pressure on everybody getting it right at the moment. Because at the end of the day, the purpose is only ever an invitation. We can't make other people feel inspired. We can just put out a purpose as an invitation for you, every individual, to find their own inspiration in it. So it's keeping it in perspective there.
I love that quote. The purpose is an invitation.
That one I think is mine.
Well, it's yours now. We have it here recorded. First time. That's yours.
Yeah.
And I love that too, especially the communication starts before the launch, so to speak. Because, and again, you're the expert here on this, but in my experience, I've felt that if change is communicated in a stop this, start that, there's layers of roadblocks. Why do I have to stop this? Why do I have to stop that? Why in between? But if the change can somehow be communicated, better demonstrated as maybe a shift, but a continuance of what they're already doing. And it's
Mhm.
already in motion. There's already progress. It's not a stop and start. And maybe the most random example of this ever would be when I was back in interrogation. If we had people that we were working with that concluded an interrogation and said, okay, thank you, this conversation is over, please write a written statement, they would run into all kinds of resistance to writing it down because they just told this person we're done. Oh, wait, we're not done. You need to do this. Whereas when we just had a natural segue, thank you for sharing everything with me. I really appreciate it. And we've reached a time in the conversation where it's now your opportunity to share in your own words on paper and literally hand it to them as we're saying it. Like
Yeah.
now it's a continuation of what I've already been doing. So, okay, it's the next step. And I feel like maybe say this, the word psychology might be too big a term, but that's really a part of this. Yes, it's an
Yeah.
invitation, but if we communicate it the right way, it's not a stop and start change. It is capturing their input, their ideas, their experience, and this is just the next progression to what they're already doing.
Yeah. I think stop start is it's really hard because what you're essentially asking somebody to do is to take a leap of faith. They're on firm ground on this side of the cliff, and we're asking them to jump to the other cliff in something that feels like black and white. And to actually take that leap is really hard. Now, if we create some kind of bridge, they're more likely to go across it. So I love what you're saying there. Yeah.
When we think about the purpose, I should probably say
Mhm.
thank you. I appreciate that. When we talk about the purpose, I also love how you approach it in a way where, yes, the purpose is an invitation, and yes, it should be aspirational and hopefully cause people to feel inspired in their own way for their own reason. But it also has to set up the strategy, and it also has to set up the culture. Is the impression that I'm getting from it.
Right.
So, as you work with organizations to transition purpose into strategy, how do you help bridge that conversation? Because I feel like sometimes the purpose conversation can
Mhm.
be aspirational. Everybody feels great. They're standing on their toes. They're smiling. They're writing cool words on the whiteboard. This is how we want everyone to feel. Oh, strategy? You mean now I need a plan to actually do all this and make it work? So, how do we use the purpose to set up that strategy?
Ah, it's a really good question, and one that different organizations take different approaches on.
Mhm.
I think I say you start with purpose, and then you have your strategy and culture come after that.
Yeah.
But the reality in most organizations is they've got a lot of things going on at the same time. And if you think of yourself as a new CEO and you've just taken on an organization, that the board has already asked you to create a new strategy. You already know that you either need to create a new strategy or implement the strategy you've got. Uh, you can also be an enlightened CEO who thinks we need to make sure that we have a updated articulation of our purpose. One can't stop waiting for the other. So they often happen hand in hand, and strategy might come forward first. If that strategy is truly based on an understanding of the biggest impact that this organization can have and a differentiated factor on not only on today's market conditions, but on what are likely to be the market conditions in the future, then my guess is that you're right into the purpose anyway. If the strategy is not based on that, if there seems to be a conflict, uh, then I would recommend that the team go back and start with the purpose and say, what does the purpose guide us to be our our greatest impact 50 years from now? That conversation might last 15 minutes and it's very conceptual. Okay, 20, 10, 5, 6 months. And in that process, that kind of future backing process is an opportunity to unlock a more inspired and purposeful strategy. because the leaders themselves are getting out of today and into tomorrow. I want to be very clear that sometimes people look at strategy and there's an implication that comes from strategy that might be increased efficiency, that might be lower cost, that might mean a layoff. Just because you have a purpose doesn't mean that you won't face the reality of layoffs, restructuring. In fact, it's at a time when that is necessary that you most want your purpose to be guiding you on how you take that forward with a view not just of today, but with a view of what's the long-term impact? What is the long-term relationship we want with these human beings who are going to be touched by this decision? And then we use the purpose and cultural attributes as a way to keep us true to ourselves as leaders, true to the soul of our company as we make and enact that hard decision.
Your comment about staying true to yourself is extremely important. It might be said as staying true to your values or your organizational values, but it's staying true to yourself. I like the way that you said that. And a lot of times I would imagine that clearly identifying your purpose and staying true and staying committed to that purpose could require making such difficult decisions. Like,
exactly.
We've been moving in this direction and we thought we were great, but we just kind of checked the GPS and realized that we're heading in the wrong direction. That's not really what we're supposed to be doing. We've got a plan to get back. But in order to get that plan, we've got to make some really hard decisions in order to get there. And I've heard you use the phrase human beings multiple times in this conversation. And I think that's really important as well. My wife is a chief human resources officer. And unfortunately, both of us throughout our careers have been involved in any number of scenarios where people were told they no longer had the opportunity to work at this location for various reasons. Unfortunate they made decisions and cost themselves their own jobs and in between. But it's always a human being.
Right.
That person has to walk out those doors and figure out what are they going to do next? How do they support their family? How do they accept themselves that this just happened? How do they save face when they tell other people? So it doesn't mean that the decision isn't necessary or isn't right, but treating everybody like human beings and valuing that universality of the human experience becomes a critical component in the process.
Yeah, exactly. And I find too often that in the very principled effort to follow legal advice and follow HR policies, leaders default to those and forget their humanity and forget the humanity of others. And I hope that your wife and other CHROs out there really stand for this idea that we can do both. We can follow legal guidance, we can enact HR policies, and we can have caring conversations that protect the dignity and future of the individuals who are impacted. And I think this is also what comes to the other part of your question, which was culture and how purpose can impact culture. Oftentimes, when the bridge between purpose and culture would be the definition of beliefs, values, desired behaviors, core behaviors, whatever you want to call them, maybe even competencies, although to me, competencies is an HR technical term that gets mixed up with job descriptions and things like that. And if the purpose is not just the one statement, but it is that translation into these cultural attributes, then those cultural attributes are going to give every leader the guideposts on how to have these conversations and how to not only take care of that one person, but take care of the rest of the team that remains. And those elements Whereas the purpose might last a generation, the articulation of a purpose might last a generation. The beliefs, maybe they'll last that long, or maybe the language will get updated. Those behaviors are related to the strategy, they're related to the business cycle, they're related to what the individuals in the organization need to learn and practice today. So those can renew over time. I think those are the tools that can help bridge that space between aspirational purpose and the culture we're living in and bringing to life every day.
Oh, that's a great illustration. And if I recall correctly, I believe I've heard you talk about, is it the human element or the human dimension in organizational success? And
Yeah.
I feel like this all ties back to that
Yeah.
it can be very easy for leaders to look at things logically, rationally, spreadsheet based, numbers based, and this is where we need to be. This is where we need to go. This is what the balance sheet needs to look like. This is what the P&L needs to look like. These are the decisions to make it there. But the human factor is what's going to drive that. Um, in your experience, I'm sure that in different levels, in different scenarios you have, how have you been able to orchestrate, and this might be a too strong of a term, but breakthrough moments with CEOs to help them really refocus on the human element? The decision might still be right. We're not questioning that, but really capture that human dimension in the process.
Mm. How do I do that? I have a sense of it, but putting it into words, how am I going to put that into words? In summary, everything I'm thinking of comes back to the sense of the leader themselves tapping into their own humanity. The leader letting themselves have emotions. The leader being present to the stories that have made them who they are today. The leader being supported and held themselves as a human. The leader recognizing and feeling their own vulnerability. In terms of how I would do that, I think I'm just more of an intuitive person, that I don't have a method.
Sure.
It's just about being with that person, fully being with that person. And when I'm at my best, in the right circumstances, being able to take a whole team into that place. It takes time. It takes quiet. It takes a shift from we're doing something to we're being. It's uncomfortable for leaders and teams. I mean, this is when the agenda says this, people say, what are we wasting our time on? Let's get to it. So that's the first step, is some kind of quiet, some kind of space, some kind of moving out of an invitation to move out of the rational mind and into the intuitive mind, into the humanness of ourselves. Sounds touchy-feely. That's as close as I can get to answering your question, I think.
No, it might sound a little touchy-feely, but it makes sense. And I feel like, to tie it back to something we were talking about a few moments ago, I could certainly be wrong. My suspicion is, for many leaders, when they find themselves needing to communicate change, or kind of worst case, a layoff, restructure, some of the things we were talking about before, these are uncomfortable conversations that most people don't want to have. Nobody really wants to have. I guess some people have done it enough, or they believe in it enough where it's easier for them to accept it, but nobody wants to have them. Fortunately or unfortunately, I made a career out of having to have uncomfortable conversations. I still don't wake up every day saying, you know what I really want to do today? Like, I'd rather avoid it if at all possible. It's natural for all of us. And unfortunately, I feel like, whether it is the legal advice or the HR policy or some of the things that you mentioned, those provide excuses or rationales for people in leadership positions to deny their humanity, their vulnerability, and the humanity and vulnerability of others. Well, I'd really like to be able to be more empathetic about having this conversation, but these are the rules and I'm busy, so we're going to follow the rules. And
Yeah.
it's an excuse, for lack of a better term, to stay inside that comfort zone or whatever we want to call it, and let the problem unwind itself.
Yeah.
Because often at the end of the day, I don't like that phrase. I'm sorry, I should come up with another one. When the situation reaches a level of being resolved, I don't know if that's
Okay.
the CEO or the leader is still going to be there.
Yeah.
It's the people whose lives are
Yeah.
going to be more impacted
Yeah.
than the leaders. And I think this likely ties back into George Corey's work on, or it's probably not his work, but the way he ties into or builds on attachment theory and that
Mhm.
secure base where
Yeah.
if I'm with somebody and I'm professionally vulnerable enough for them to be vulnerable, now we can create that bond. And even if at the end of this conversation, we're going two separate ways, we can still shake hands and be appreciative of how we got here because it was an experience we had together. It wasn't an experience I gave to you.
Right. Or
Whether
something I
you,
imposed on you, right?
yes,
That's really interesting. And I'm not sure how much George talked to you and, in that other podcast, how much he talked about his success as a hostage negotiator.
yes,
Did he talk about that?
a little bit.
Yeah. It's this idea that hostage negotiators are successful because they bond with the hostage taker as a person.
Mhm.
And that reminds the hostage taker of their inner humanity. And it creates a sense of trust in which they can find a shared interest. Shared interest is resolving the situation. And then the hostage negotiators end up resolving the situation with the hostage taker, often being arrested or hopefully not being shot, but at least being arrested. And somehow in that, the hostage taker has felt honored, has felt seen, has been felt heard by the hostage negotiator. I mean, it's such an incredible story. And if we elevate this idea to what you referred to the term secure bases, and this concept of secure-based leadership. Secure-based leadership is based on the concept that you first create a bond with the people you're leading. You show an interest in them as human beings, a focus on the relationship and the trust. And in that space, you can provide caring and safety and protection. This is a safety net, right? And you don't just do that so that people are safe and stay in the safety net. You do it so that then you can also meet that second basic human need. First is attachment, belonging. Second, or acceptance, technically acceptance, bonding, attachment. And the second need of achievement that you can help people achieve. And, I held up the book just a little while ago, but it's the leader who's holding the rope, belaying the other individual, not holding the rope so they stay on the ground. You're holding the rope and providing the protection so that that other person takes risk and grows and achieves and gets to the top of the mountain. And for me, you said that this is one of the best leadership books you've read. This concept of leadership is so understandable. You combine caring and daring, a focus on the relationship and a focus on the results. When those are present together in equal measure, with the caring and the protection coming first, it's a space of courage. People take risks, they grow, they try new things, they develop independence, and hopefully they go off to be a secure base, providing caring and daring for somebody else. That's where you get that flywheel going in the right direction.
Yes. And how many times has a leader expressed frustration to you that someone continues to come to them, they won't solve their own problems, or someone continues to have the same mistake, or somebody's not innovating, or somebody isn't seeing something the way that I'm saying? Well, that's because they're scared.
Right.
It's
Right.
because that
They're
inherently
not, they don't
involves.
feel that protection and that safety, right? They're scared.
Yes.
We're back to
Yep.
the fear that we were talking about at the beginning. Yeah.
Yep. Something in that previous relationship has taught them that if I go out here and I try this and I screw this up, I'm going to be in a precarious position that I don't want to be in. So option A is go try it and risk getting in air quotes trouble, or I can just keep coming to you because that's safe. And if it was your idea and you told me to do it, then you can't come back at me
Right.
for it. So it's kind of back to that lowest common denominator theory. If I have 10 people acting in a way they shouldn't be, but I'm the only thing in common those 10 people have in this situation, maybe it's something I'm doing to cause the behavior that I don't want.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is really interesting that if you really see, if you think of a 2x2 with, caring on the horizontal and daring on the vertical, obviously where caring's high, daring's high, that's courage, that's creativity, that's growth, individual and organizational. And if you go to the side where the focus on results, that challenge and push is really high, but there's not the bond between the leader and the people. The focus on relationships is not there. There's not the sense of safety. What you find in that quadrant is leaders who are into control, leaders who are telling everybody what to do, leaders who are constantly pushing for results by giving specific directions and setting super high expectations that people can't meet. And people freeze, right? In that organization, people freeze, just as you said. They just do what they're told. And then the more people just only do what they're told because that's the only thing that's safe, the more the leader says, see, look at these people. I have to tell them everything. The more that leader micromanages. Mm-hmm. And you get into that cycle. And the only way to break that cycle, focus on the relationship. Go back to the human to human bond. Create some safety and protection, and then little by little invite people in to take a risk. They experiment and see they're safe, and then they can take a bigger risk.
I agree entirely. I'm trying to remember. I think George refers to it as like playing to win versus playing not to lose.
Right. Well, he originally called it playing to win. And now, especially Susan Goldsworthy, as she's taken this on, has really reframed it as playing to thrive.
Okay.
Some people misunderstood playing to win as crushing somebody else.
Sure.
But it's really playing to thrive. It's playing to win together, or it's playing to thrive. And playing to dominate is that quadrant that is all about control and results. You also, if you over rotate on the caring and protection and under rotate on the results, that's playing not to lose. Mm-hmm. Let's just be safe. And to be clear, that's a cocoon that is very useful for a short period of time. If an organization is in grief, as we said, after the organization has been working hard, going through lots of change, take it back, take the results off for a little while, regroup, re-energize. That's fine. It's just if you stay there, you're going to lose your high performers and the organization is not going to grow and you're not going to achieve what you need to achieve. And then the fourth quadrant, where there's low focus on results and low caring, might be called playing to avoid. And that can really be a place of burnout. That can be a leader who's just distant, disconnected. Does it happen? Yes. But not, I think, nearly as much as the other three quadrants.
Sure. Well, I can't thank you enough for the time that you spent and all that you shared with us today. And I have no doubt that there are people who have been taking just as many notes as I have been during the conversation, and they want to learn more. So for people who are looking to connect with you, learn more from you, and benefit even more from your experience and expertise, where should they go?
LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. It's Katherine Armstrong. And if you just put CUSP, remember culture, strategy, and purpose, CUSP. If you put those words in, you'll find me on LinkedIn. Love to connect with you. Message me if you want a one-on-one conversation. I love talking about this stuff.
And I can vouch for that, because after we met, that's basically how these conversations started, and they've kept going through the years. So certainly appreciate yourself appreciate you making yourself available and having these conversations and certainly spreading what you've learned and what is so effective for so many organizations globally. I should mention, we didn't really get into that part of the conversation, but you've not just applied these lessons domestically, you've applied them globally and have for lack of a better term, the use cases to substantiate it from all around the world.
Yeah.
Talking about the universality of the human experience. So although there's going to be differences at the core, it's all the same.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I love hearing from you and learning from you too.
So stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you again, hopefully around town here pretty soon.
Yeah, maybe so.
Take care. Katherine, thank you so much for an amazing conversation. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. I appreciate the depth of your answers, all that you contributed, the experience, quoting your sources as well. George Kohlreiser, always great to have him back involved and mentioned in the podcast as well. Thank you very much for everything that you shared. One of the thoughts you shared early on that I thought was extremely valuable was shifting from the burning platform mentality to the burning ambition mentality. Why do we want to create a burning platform to get everybody just to jump off when we can create a burning ambition to get them moving in a direction that's more meaningful for them? I love that. Also, the idea of remembering where people are. And you talked about that change curve, the grief curve. And as we work through that, often we're already at the end of it when other people are maybe at the beginning or somewhere else. Remembering where people are, which allows us, to another great point you made, resonate with our audience first. Because if they feel like we truly understand what they're experiencing in the moment, they're more likely to listen, they're more likely to follow, they're more likely to accept that new identity as they move through the change process. Great conversation, Katherine. Thank you so very much. And of course, thank you to everybody that took the time to listen today. We appreciate you here week after week, listening to all these great resources and conversations. Hopefully you're taking notes and taking a lot of this with you as you move on with your day. Thank you so much for being here. Before we go, let's thank our sponsors one more time. HumanTel. If you haven't, please head over to humantel.com and enter the code Inquisive25. That will get you 25% off of their best-in-class online self-paced training. I've done it all. I highly recommend it. If you've ever thought about developing the skill set to know what people are likely thinking and feeling at any moment in time by registering their changing emotions within the context of the situation, through recognizing shifts in their facial expression and nonverbal behavior, HumanTel is the place to go. Inquisive25 is your code for 25% off. That's at humantel.com. Professional interviewers in the audience, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. Again, that's where you can learn everything you need to know: who qualifies for membership with the International Association of Interviewers, what educational options are available, what member benefits and resources are there. And that's where you can learn more about the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. What does it take to qualify, earn, maintain the designation, and what can it mean for you in your career? All that and more at certifiedinterviewer.com. And thank you while you're online for heading over to Inquisive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs that our clients ask us to facilitate for their senior leaders, their sales teams, their HR teams, and beyond, to teach them the strategic and ethical observation skills and persuasion skills necessary to obtain the everyday confession, essentially encourage people to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences. All those programs and more over there at Inquisive.com. Thank you so much again for joining us for another great episode. Please, before you go, like the show, share the show, subscribe to the show, tell your friends about it, leave us your feedback. What or who would you like to see more of on the show? We'll put it together for you. Thank you so much for being here. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.